And he said he looked at that number and he was like, man, that's a lot, you know? And he said he heard the voice of the Lord in that moment speak very, almost audibly to him. He heard the voice of the Lord say, I want you to give that away. And he was like, surely I've eaten some bad pizza. The Lord, is not speaking to me that. He said, but God wouldn't let him go. That the number and the word of the Lord that God said he wanted them to give it away were prevalent in his life. And he said he took a few days, and he said it took him a while. Like he had to make some phone calls and deal with accountants and deal with stuff to amass that money into one account, to write a check for that amount, to take it and give it. And the pastor who's telling this story was telling it because this was he gave it to his church, you know what I mean? So he takes this check and gives it to the church, and he says, wow, okay, this is what the Lord says. And so then he says, he goes on another year, and he's about a year later, he said he's sitting on his couch and he hears the Lord ask him, how much money do you have? And so his first thought is, oh God, we're not doing this again. What do you need from me? He's like, what do you mean? He says the Lord just asked him again, how much money do you have? So he says he went down, sat down for a couple of hours, made the phone calls, did the stuff, came up with the number, this time a little bit more willing to do whatever the Lord had for him. He says, but he saw very clearly when he got the number what it meant. God had showed him that in that 1 year's time, that number of the amount of money that he had was exactly doubled in all of his accounts. He had twice as much as he had. What he had given away, God had doubled up in the next year in that way. Now, I know we're all not rich businessmen, and that's fine. But let me tell you my takeaway in the story. While he's telling this story, the takeaway comes to me because I'm thinking, but if you gave away everything you had, how did you get the next year? But how many of you know he still had construction companies? And he still had his abilities and his brain, and he had all of his skill sets, and he had all of his workers, and he had all of his homes and all of his properties and all of his things. He still had the ability to make money, right? He still had the ability to make money. God may have taken the dollar sign out of his bank account, right? But he still had everything else that God had given him to produce what God had for him in his life, right? The number was important for half a second, but the realization that the next day, do you know what happened at the end of the week? I bet you he got paid for a contract, got paid for another thing. You know what I'm saying?